In my life, I have always struggled and envied people who have figured out a way to make a difference in the
Be a touch of love. Right.
David Letterman spent more than 3 decades dominating late-night television, winning over millions with his razor-sharp wit, sarcastic humor, and interviews that could go from hilarious to brutally awkward in a heartbeat. He became a master at keeping this cool on camera, but behind the scenes, not every celebrity encounter was as pleasant as it seemed. Over the years, whispers have surfaced about certain guests who rubbed Letterman the wrong way, whether it was because of inflated egos, tense exchanges, or unscripted moments that spiraled out of control. Some were awkwardly funny, others downright uncomfortable, and a few left a lasting mark on Letterman's memory for all the wrong reasons. Join us in this video as we will talk about David Letterman's list of the 5 celebrities he hated the most. David Letterman was born on April 12th, 1947 in Indianapolis, Indiana, a place where the weather changes so quickly you could wear shorts in the morning and shovel snow in the afternoon. His father, Harry Joseph Letterman, was a florist who could make flowers look like they were having a better time than most humans, and his mother, Dorothy, was a church secretary with the patience of a saint, which you need when you're raising a boy like Dave. As a kid, Letterman was shy but mischievous, the kind of boy who could look you in the eye with perfect innocence while there was a frog in your lunchbox. He loved cars so much that as a teenager, he worked at a local supermarket just to pay for gas, which was a solid investment since driving was his favorite way to escape boredom. His grades in school were fine, but he wasn't exactly the teacher's pet, unless the teacher had a pet who doodled jokes instead of taking notes. When Dave was just a teenager, tragedy struck. His father died of a heart attack at only 57, a loss that hit him hard and stayed with him for life. Dave rarely spoke about it openly, but you could feel it sometimes, under the jokes, behind the smirk. There was a kid who'd learned too early that nothing is guaranteed. But young David had a secret weapon, curiosity mixed with a taste for the absurd. He loved listening to the radio, especially to funny hosts who could turn an ordinary day into something he'd remember. The idea that someone could make strangers laugh from miles away fascinated him. Soon enough, he was dreaming about doing it himself, though at the time it probably seemed as far away as the moon. By the time he got to Ball State University, he was already known for his dry wit and love of pranks. If there was a way to turn a boring moment into a surreal one, Dave would find it. Broadcasting became his way of sneaking that humor into the world. And so, from a shy, car-obsessed boy in Indiana, part dreamer, part troublemaker, part grieving son, David Letterman started building the foundation for the sharp, oddball voice that would one day change late-night television forever. But back then he was just Dave from Indy, trying to make life a little funnier than it had to be. 5 celebrities he hated the most. Number 1, Jay Leno. The David Letterman-Jay Leno saga is one of the great soap operas of late-night television, except instead of dramatic music and cliffhangers, it had monologues, smirks, and the occasional sarcastic jab. It all started in 1992 when Johnny Carson announced he was stepping down from The Tonight Show. Letterman, who had been hosting Late Night with David Letterman on NBC for a decade, naturally assumed he was the heir apparent. After all, Carson himself reportedly preferred Dave for the gig. Letterman had the wit, the following, and the quirky unpredictability that made him a fresh alternative to the old-school talk show style. But NBC had other plans. They chose Jay Leno. The decision was a blow for Letterman, both professionally and personally. Leno had been a frequent guest host for Carson, but to Dave, he wasn't just a colleague, he was someone he'd shared green rooms and laughs with. The choice felt like a betrayal, and in true late-night fashion, the drama played out under the glare of studio lights. Suddenly, their smiles on camera looked just a little too forced. Letterman left NBC for CBS, where he launched The Late Show with David Letterman in 1993. On the surface, both men went about their business, interviewing stars, telling jokes, and pretending not to notice each other. But in reality, the rivalry was everywhere: tabloids, interviews, award shows. Ratings were treated like boxing scores. Whenever one man edged ahead, the other's team would quietly grind their teeth and plot the next big booking. What made this feud so fascinating was how different the two men were. Leno had the middle America charm, the chin, and the love for car engines. Letterman had the sly Midwestern sarcasm, the irony, and a knack for making awkward moments into art. They weren't just competing for an audience, they were competing for the soul of late night television. The bitterness mellowed over time, but the sting never completely disappeared. Books were written about the late shift, and even an HBO movie dramatized the whole affair, complete with hair prosthetics and exaggerated smirks. In later years, the two men made polite appearances together, like exes who can share the same table but will never ever share dessert. For Letterman, the Leno chapter was more than just a career hiccup. It was a reminder that in show business, talent matters, timing matters, but politics might matter most of all. And yet, in classic Letterman style, he managed to turn that loss into a reinvention, building his own legacy at CBS while letting the feud simmer quietly in the background, ready to bubble up anytime someone brought up 1992. Number two, Oprah. It all started in 1989 when Oprah appeared on Late Night with David Letterman. On paper, it should have been a perfect meeting two hugely talented Midwesterners who had carved their own paths in television sitting down to chat. But the segment went sideways. Letterman, in his typical fashion, peppered Oprah with needling questions and sly jokes that could feel either playfully sharp or just plain sharp, depending on your tolerance for sarcasm. Oprah, who was used to being in control of interviews, didn't seem to enjoy being the target of Dave's offbeat, sometimes uncomfortable humor. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, the damage had been done. Oprah walked away feeling she'd been treated rudely, maybe even mocked. She didn't come back, and she didn't say much publicly about it either, but her absence spoke volumes. For years, whenever Letterman was asked why Oprah never returned, he would dodge the question with a smirk or a quip, sometimes even poking fun at the feud itself. He joked about it in monologues, as if to say, I know she's mad, but I'll be over here having fun with it. Behind the scenes, the standoff lasted an astonishing 16 years. They weren't exchanging public insults, but neither were they extending an olive branch that stuck. It became one of those showbiz curiosities. Oprah could sit down with presidents and movie stars, but she wasn't going anywhere near the Ed Sullivan Theater. The thaw finally came in 2005, and fittingly, it was tied to a bit of showmanship. Oprah had a Broadway show to promote, The Color Purple, and she agreed to appear on The Late Show. By then, the feud had taken on a life of its own, so her appearance became an event in itself. When she walked out onto that stage after a decade and a half, the audience roared. Letterman, for his part, seemed genuinely pleased, even a little humbled to have her back. They addressed the long gap, each offering their version of events, laughing at how absurd it was that two adults had let something linger for so long. It was classic Letterman turning a real wound into a shared joke, and classic Oprah, too, finding a way to turn an awkward history into a feel-good reunion. But for 16 years, their absence from each other's worlds had been one of the strangest, most understated rifts in television history. Number three, Madonna. Madonna's 1994 appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman is one of those television moments that people still talk about decades later, not because it was charming or warm, but because it was the kind of car crash you couldn't look away from. From the moment she walked on stage, it was clear this was not going to be the usual celebrity plugging their latest project. She strolled out wearing a loose, sporty outfit, chewing gum like a bored teenager, and carrying herself with an air of, I'm here, but I'm not playing by your rules. Letterman, never one to back down from a challenge, immediately leaned into his trademark teasing. He made jokes about her love life, her language, her reputation, and Madonna, rather than deflect with a polite laugh, went for open confrontation. She dropped more than a dozen F-bombs, uncensored at the time, so many that the network's censors must have been sweating through their shirts. The conversation turned into a sparring match. Letterman would toss a sly insult or a sexual innuendo, and Madonna would volley back with something even more provocative. At times, she didn't answer his questions at all, instead chiding him for being a sick fuck or telling the audience he smelled bad. It wasn't just playful banter, it had a real edge, as if they were both testing how far they could push before someone called it quits. The audience, caught in the middle, alternated between nervous laughter and genuine shock. This wasn't the sanitized, media trained version of celebrity interviews that late night TV usually offered. This was raw, unpredictable, and uncomfortable. By the end of the segment, Madonna had refused multiple times to leave the stage when her interview slot was over. She stayed put, pushing the chaos further, almost daring Letterman to make her go. And he didn't, he just kept needling her. The two of them were locked in a weird competitive dance that was equal parts comedy and combat. The fallout was huge. Critics slammed the interview as crass and unwatchable, while others defended it as one of the most honest pieces of TV in years. Letterman himself later said he wasn't offended. He'd always liked Madonna, but the whole exchange became legendary as one of the most awkward confrontational moments in his career. It was the perfect storm, two cultural icons, both used to being in control, colliding on live television with no script and no mercy. And for anyone who watched that night, it proved that when Madonna and Letterman shared a stage, unpredictable wasn't just a possibility, it was inevitable. Number 4, Cher. Cher's relationship with David Letterman was never the polite "thanks for having me" variety. It was built on a mix of mutual respect, razor-sharp wit, and just enough tension to keep the audience on edge. Their most famous moment came in 1986 during her very first appearance on Late Night with David Letterman. By then, Cher was already a pop icon, a TV veteran, and someone who had no problem speaking her mind. Letterman, of course, was a master at pushing buttons just to see what would happen. From the second she sat down, you could tell Dave was poking at her, trying to get a reaction. He teased her about not wanting to come on his show, asking why it had taken her so long. Cher, without missing a beat, told him the truth, or at least her truth. "Because I thought you were an asshole," she said, smiling just enough to keep it from sounding purely hostile. The audience exploded, and even Letterman had to pause for a moment to let it sink in. It wasn't just a throwaway insult, it was a mic drop before mic drop was even a thing. Number 5, Harvey Pecker. David Letterman's on-air battles with Harvey Pecker were some of the strangest, most uncomfortable encounters in late-night history. Pecker, the underground comic book writer best known for his autobiographical series American Splendor, wasn't a Hollywood type. He wasn't polished, didn't care about playing along, and certainly wasn't there to charm the audience. That alone made him an odd fit for the slick, joke-driven world of late night with David Letterman. But that's exactly why Dave invited him, at least in the beginning. Their first meetings in the mid-1980s were awkward but intriguing. Pecker would shuffle onto the set, looking more like a man headed to the hardware store than a national TV guest. Letterman, who had a taste for oddballs, would poke fun at Pecker's grumpiness and self-deprecating style. The exchanges were unusual, but at first they stayed within the bounds of quirky television. Then things turned. By 1987 and 1988, Pecker had grown increasingly frustrated with what he saw as the corporate nature of network television. In particular, he had a bone to pick with NBC's parent company, General Electric. On one infamous night, Pecker took aim directly at Letterman, accusing him on air of being a shill for General Electric. It wasn't said with a wink, it was said like a man delivering a fact he'd been sitting on for months. Letterman, visibly irritated, tried to steer things back into safer territory, but Pecker wouldn't let it go. He kept hammering away, talking about corporate greed and implying that Dave's whole act was compromised by his employers. The audience didn't quite know how to react. This wasn't playful banter or a staged bit, it was a real confrontation happening in real time. Letterman responded with sarcasm, occasionally leaning into outright mockery, but it was clear the moment had crossed from funny to tense. By the end of that night, Letterman had decided he'd had enough. He told Pecker he wouldn't be back on the show, a decision that felt final. For years, that seemed to be the end of it, Pecker went back to his comics and his cult following. Letterman went back to his celebrity interviews and ironic comedy, and the bizarre little chapter became a piece of late night lore. But time has a way of softening even the strangest grudges. Eventually, Letterman invited Pecker back, and though the tension was still there, it had cooled into something closer to mutual weariness. Pecker remained unapologetically himself, skeptical, blunt, unwilling to play the TV game, and Letterman, older and maybe a little more patient, seemed to accept that was just who Harvey Pecker was. In the end, their clashes weren't just about two men not getting along. They were about two completely different worlds colliding: the scrappy, anti-establishment voice of an underground artist and the corporate entertainment-driven world of network television. And for a few unforgettable nights in the late 80s, that collision played out live, without a script and without a safety net.